Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the weirdly soothing world of Roman accounting. That's right. Prepare to drift off not to the sounds of ocean waves or rustling leaves, but the gentle clink of pebbles on a wooden counting board. You're standing in the heart of a tabularium, Rome's public record office, where the air smells faintly of old parchment, dust, and whatever ink was made from crushed squid this week. Marble columns loom around you, but your attention is on something far less majestic. A squat, scowling man hunched over a table littered with small, smooth stones. Each pebble represents a number. Some are set in neat rows. Others are clumped into chaotic mountains, like a sandcastle made by someone who failed math class and never recovered emotionally. He shifts a single pebble forward. A grain shipment is now accounted for. One tiny rock, one massive economic engine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to comment your city and local time below. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You inch closer, barefoot on cool marble. Outside, you can hear the hum of the forum hawkers, lawyers, donkeys with boundary issues, but inside, it's the soft tap-tap of stones on wood. Each pebble on the counting board isn't just a number. It's a memory, a transaction, a whispered contract between bureaucrats. You're watching Rome's version of Excel. But if Excel involved zero electricity and a high chance of dropping all your formulas during a gust of wind, these aren't just any stones, either. They're calculi Latin for little stones. They're carefully chosen for smoothness, weight, and size. You don't want a boulder to represent half a loaf of bread. That would be overkill, and honestly, exhausting to carry. No, these are palm-sized, finger-worn, river-slicked bits of math. And they're everywhere from taverns to tax booths to the dusty corners of senatorial offices where scrolls go to die. A junior accountant nearby offers you one, wordlessly. It's warm from his hand. Maybe this one tracked olive oil shipments from Hispania, or helped balance the books after some senator accidentally lost 3,000 denarii during a dice game in Antioch. The pebble doesn't tell you. It just exists. Quiet, useful, judgy. You set it on the board beside another. Suddenly, you've created a number, 1 plus 1, a humble start. Historians still argue whether these calculi were meant for private use only or if the state endorsed them. There are no surviving official Roman pebble policy parchments. But given the empire's love of rules, it wouldn't be surprising. The man beside you shifts again. He mumbles something about grain taxes from Africa, rubs his temples, and moves 3 stones into a new row. You watch closely. It's not addition like you know it. There's no equal sign, just relationships, placement, spatial math. It's like Sudoku, but the punishment for failure is exile. You try copying him. You fumble. Your rows are uneven. A pebble rolls off the board and lands with a tiny plink against a clay ink pot. He sighs, not angrily, just deeply, like a man who's trained in 12 systems of accountancy and still wakes up with cold sweats about decimal points. But here's the thing. It works. This lo-fi system manages the finances of a sprawling empire. Roads, armies, slave markets, aqueducts, lavish feasts, temples with ceilings so high they come with altitude warnings somehow. All of it balanced by people shuffling rocks around like a really intense game of Mancala. One of the pebble counters takes a break. He sips watered wine from a terracotta mug and mutters that the grain tallies are off by 7 modati. He's not sure if the error came from the docks or the desert. You ask how they double-check things. He blinks, then lifts a second tray, an identical setup with its own pebbles, and begins recreating the number he just calculated. A literal backup copy, like dragging a file into a second folder, but with a real chance of stepping on it later and ruining your entire fiscal quarter. You ask if the pebbles ever get mixed up. He doesn't answer. He just stares out the window like a man who's seen too much. There's something comforting in the repetition, the methodical nature. Slide, count, check, slide, count, check. No flashing screens, no passwords, no spinning wheel of death, just stone. hand, and brain. Some scholars argue that this method predated writing, that before scribes scratched numbers onto wax or inked them into scrolls, people were already using physical objects to represent abstract thought. Pebbles weren't just tools. They were stepping stones to civilization. Others claim the Romans borrowed this from the Greeks, who borrowed it from the Egyptians, who probably stole it from some Mesopotamian shepherd, just trying to remember how many sheep he lost to wolves last week. Either way, you're now sitting beside a man who can multiply using rocks, which is arguably more impressive than any phone app. The marble cools your legs as you crouch lower. More interested now in the language of placement. Certain rows mean hundreds. Certain zones are for subtractions. You see a pattern emerging, not chaos, but a quiet choreography. You blink, and someone drops a scroll on the desk behind you. It lists upcoming deliveries, wine from Gaul, fish sauce from Pompeii, a suspicious number of imported parrots. The accountant sighs again, and slides another pebble forward. You've barely adjusted to the rhythm of pebbles sliding across wooden boards when someone waves a wax tablet at your face like it owes them money. The wax is smudged, half melted in the summer heat, and scrawled with something that looks like a numeric curse. Roman numerals. You stare at them. X, L, C, M, all sharp angles and lofty drama, like they were designed by someone who really wanted numbers to look like angry gladiators. Here's the thing about Roman numerals. They're elegant when carved into stone, great for arches, great for declaring which Caesar funded which bathhouse. But when it comes to doing actual math, not so much. There's a reason you never see anyone trying to calculate compound interest with DCCXL. It's less accounting and more ancient Sudoku with consequences. You try adding XL to LX. Is that 40 plus 80? Does that mean CXX? Or was that the name of a senator's favorite racing horse? No one knows, not even the numerals. A clerk notices your confusion and leans over, whispering like he's telling you where the emperor hides his snacks. That's why we don't actually use them for math, he says, pointing to the tray of pebbles. That's what these are for. Roman numerals, it turns out, are for show, official documents, inscriptions, tombs. But behind closed doors, especially where math gets messy, the Romans lean on the calculus. The pebbles do the real work. Now imagine being a soldier in the Roman army. You're issued a salary, called a stipendium, which comes with deductions, food, gear, and the occasional voluntary temple donation. Your pay is written in Roman numerals on your receipt scroll, but the guy handing it to you, he did the math using rocks. You picture a centurion slamming his helmet down because someone calculated his bonus with the wrong pebble. Not so far-fetched. There are documented complaints in old military records about pay disputes, deductions that accidentally doubled, and supplies that never quite made it to the front. Historians still argue whether some of these errors were deliberate or just the result of someone kicking over a counting board at the worst possible moment. Back at the forum, you spot a merchant's assistant scribbling frantically on a wax tablet with a stylus. His wax is bubbling from the heat, and he keeps blowing on it like a fussy baker. He's recording transactions using numerals again, for show, but beside him is a dusty tray and a pile of stones, each one slightly different in shape. Some have notches carved into them. Others are dyed with faint streaks of reddish pigment. It's like each pebble has its own resume. One stone equals 1 unit, 2 stack, that's 2. 4 in the second row, that might be 20, depending on your system. It's not universal. That's the catch. See, there wasn't a single standardized way to use calculi across the empire. Some shops used vertical columns. Others preferred horizontal spacing. A few just made it up as they went along and hoped their clients never asked too many questions, which they didn't because no one wanted to argue math with a guy who also sold fish guts and wine in the same stall. A breeze drifts through the forum and a pebble rolls off someone's tray. The assistant yelps and dives for it like it's a precious heirloom. You raise an eyebrow, but he explains, if one pebble is misplaced, the whole transaction can unravel. Imagine entering numbers into a spreadsheet, then deleting a random cell just to see what happens. Spoiler: chaos. The Roman system relied heavily on physical presence. Each stone mattered. If you wanted to change a number, you had to physically move something. If you wanted to delete it, well, you better remember where you put it last. There was no Control-Z in ancient Rome. So you watch them work. Counting boards, abaiki, as the Romans called them, had grooves or lines etched into them. Pebbles were placed in the grooves to indicate values. A line at the top, that might be for tens. A line in the middle, hundreds. Some boards had wax inlays to keep the stones in place. Others were just carved wood, passed down like lucky socks. One slightly unhinged banker even had silver pebbles for high-value calculations. Flashy. Completely impractical, probably stolen by pigeons. There's a rhythm to it all. Slide the stone, confirm the value, whisper the total to your assistant, write it down on a wax tablet that will likely melt by noon. You overhear someone complain that pebbles are old-fashioned. Another clerk scoffs and says, better than trusting my career to that blasted numeral, MCDXLIEV again. You kind of get it. Using pebbles to track grain shipments sounds ridiculous, until you realize how often your modern calculator app crashes during updates. One of the older clerks limps past, clutching a cloth bag that jingles faintly. Not coins, pebbles. His favorites, worn smooth over decades. They have names. One is Cato, another is that idiot Tiberius. You don't ask. He sits, lays out his board, and begins calculating livestock taxes for a senator who insists all 47 of his goats are tax-deductible because they bring emotional balance to the estate. You look again at the numerals. So noble, so completely useless when you're trying to divide 17 by 3, and the answer involves moving 4 stones back and then sideways without knocking over the wine jug. Historians still debate whether this dual-system public numerals, private pebbles, was a clever workaround or just bureaucratic laziness. Maybe both. But one thing's clear. The pebbles made it real. The numbers weren't abstract. They had weight, texture, volume. And sometimes, a pebble was the only thing keeping your ledger from falling apart. You slide another one forward. You're back in the shaded corner of the forum. Your fingers curled around a handful of smooth, chalky pebbles. Not just any pebbles, calculi. The quiet backbone of an empire that bragged about conquering continents, but couldn't quite conquer decimals. They rattle softly in your palm, like ancient dice with too much responsibility. The clerk beside you is sorting his stones with the solemnity of a priest, prepping for ritual. Each calculus is chosen with care, some darker, some lighter, some worn so smooth they reflect the flicker of an oil lamp even under the noon sun. This isn't superstition, it's method. The color, shape, and placement help him distinguish values units, tens, hundreds, because the Romans didn't have zeros. Zeros weren't invented here. Zeros were for the future, for now. If you wanted to represent nothing, you just left an empty space and hoped no one sneezed. You glance again at the saculus calculorum, the cloth bag holding these sacred little stones. It's worn, patched, and stained with wine, ink, and probably tears. This bag is a tool of memory, a soft, jingly brain extension. And this right here is where the Roman word calculus comes from. Yes, that kind of calculus. The math class you barely survived in school was named after ancient rocks that helped Romans subtract fish. Some fringe historians even argue that the specific weight of these pebbles mattered. Heavier stones were anchoring values. Lighter ones allowed faster counting. One scholar wrote a passionate essay insisting certain pebbles were magnetized for spiritual resonance. He may have also been dehydrated at the time, but still, it's not hard to see why someone might believe it. There's a tactile intimacy here. When you press the pebble between your thumb and index finger, you can almost feel the echo of ancient trade routes. Olive oil from Carthage, marble from Numidia, amphorae of garum, fermented fish sauce, sloshing in sun-baked wagons. One pebble represents 2 crates. Another, a shipment delayed by pirates. Another, compensation for a broken cart axle. The stones don't forget. You watch as the clerk's hands hover, hesitate, then pluck a single calculus from his pile and shift it into a groove on the counting board. His eyes flick between the stones and the wax tablet on his lap. One is temporary, the other eternal. If his stylus snaps, if the wax melts, if the ink runs well, the pebble remembers. Behind him, another man is struggling with a complicated transaction involving land taxes, 8 goats, and 3 missing sons-in-law. He tries using numbers, fails, switches to pebbles, succeeds. You hear him mutter, "The stones don't lie." You believe him. You test it out yourself. 2 stones in the far left column, 3 in the middle, 1 on the edge. That's 231. Or is it 321? Or a subtle political message about grain tariffs. You might not be ready for Pebble-level math yet, but you're close. Then someone dumps an entire new bag of calculi onto the table beside you. The sound is lovely, soft, and earthy, like rain on a rooftop made of bone. These pebbles are from the Tiber River, hand-collected and sun-dried. Supposedly, river stones offer better flow. That's what the seller claims. Anyway, a suspiciously smooth-talking merchant named Felix. You can't prove he's lying, but he's definitely charging extra. You pocket one anyway. Calculi are personal, says the oldest clerk. We all have favorites. He lifts a mottled red pebble with a crack down its middle. This one saved my job. You lean in. How? Marked a miscount in an officer's pay. He was missing 5 denarii. Found the error thanks to this old thing. He chuckles. Saved him. Saved me. It's not magic. It's memory. Historians still argue whether the calculi were ever standardized. Some evidence suggests the military had preferred sets, maybe with carved dots or etched numerals. Others think each region developed their own dialect of pebbles. Southern traders used flat shells. Northern ones used polished slate. In Egypt, someone found a tray full of tiny carved scarabs, possibly repurposed for bookkeeping, possibly cursed. Probably both. Back in the forum, a woman walks by with a satchel of dyed pebbles turquoise, ochre, burnt umber. You ask why they're colored. She says it helps her track different debts. Red for what she owes, blue for what she's owed, black for what she's given up on. That one hits a little hard. As the sun lowers, the stones gleam like miniature planets. You start to imagine each one as its own orb of responsibility. A world of numbers orbiting a quiet empire of hands and boards. No electricity, no automation, no spreadsheets. Just people and pebbles. It's not the system you expected. It's better. Messier, more human. And maybe, just maybe, a little more trustworthy. You slide your new favorite stone into place. It fits perfectly. You wake still crouched near the counting board to the sour, sweet scent of spilled wine and something vaguely waxy. The morning sun slices through a colonnade like a blade of gold, illuminating the most sacred of Roman sites. Not a temple, not a palace, a tax booth beside a tavern. Yes, that's where the real gods live. The gods of debt, duty, and late payments. You stretch your legs, which are slightly numb, and join the small queue forming near a rickety table run by a clerk with a crooked nose and one working sandal. In his lap, a wax tablet half covered in numbers. On the table, 3 piles of calculi in various sizes and states of confusion. He's surrounded by receipts, some wine-stained, some fish-stained, a few written on the back of someone else's love letter, and all of them reflect the quiet, constant panic of the Roman tax system. A man with a chicken in one arm slams a coin on the table and begins protesting something about land boundaries and spiritually inherited goats. The clerk sighs, rubs his temples, then reaches for the pebbles, one by one. He starts recreating the math. Slide, click, slide, slide. Pause. The numbers appear, but not like they do on parchment. No, here they live on the board, in space, with physical form. The chicken squawks. A child nearby tries to eat a calculus. The clerk remains unfazed. Welcome to fiscal Rome. Historians still debate whether these roadside tax booths use standardized rates. Some records suggest different taxes depending on the region, the day, and whether the collector liked your sandals. And even though Rome had an official coinage system, most day-to-day transactions were logged with wax tablets, spoken agreements, and of course, pebbles. Why? Because wax could be smoothed. Pebbles could be recounted. And memory? Well, memory was fickle. The clerk finally settles the chicken man's dispute with a flourish of stones. He nods once, scribbles something on the wax tablet, and promptly erases the whole thing after copying it into a scroll. You wonder, how often do mistakes happen? He glances up at you, like he heard your internal monologue. Mistakes. He snorts. All the time. That's why I use this. He reaches under the table and pulls out a battered plank, his second counting board. His backup, not identical, no. This one has deeper grooves and a burn mark at the edge, but the logic is the same. You watch him recreate the same pebble pattern he used moments ago. Double-entry bookkeeping, Roman style, not on parchment, not with numbers, with stones. He grins. If these disagree, I go with whichever one looks less cursed. Another man steps up, this one flushed and reeking of fig wine. He slaps down a wax slate scrawled with a debt tally and an apology written in very shaky Latin. The clerk frowns, reaches for a pile of blackened calculi burnt, ash-stained. You don't ask and begins adding. When it doesn't balance, he mutters, tavern debt, always a headache. Then he pulls out a string of knotted rope. You blink. Memory aid, he explains. My father's method. 1 knot per day, 2 knots per amphora. Doesn't lie. This blending of tools, rope, stone, wax, and word is everywhere. Rome's economy isn't run by perfect systems. It's run by people hedging their bets with layers of analog memory. 1 pebble for now, 1 knot for later, 1 scroll to make it all look legal. You try it yourself. A tavern girl hands you a mock bill. 4 jugs of wine, 1 plate of lentils, 2 hours in the back room, which apparently counts as a luxury fee. You try representing each item with pebbles, wine, 4 round stones, medium weight, lentils, 1 small chipped one. Backroom fee. Something sharp, vaguely threatening. The girl laughs. You'll do fine. A passing merchant tells you some taverns use seed pods instead of stones. Lighter, easier to carry, also prone to sprouting if stored near moisture, which explains a recent scandal involving a man's ledger sprouting vines mid-audit. Others use charcoal lumps, though those left stains. One clerk's fingers were permanently blackened, earning him the nickname Corvinus, or Little Raven, not a compliment. The tools varied. The system didn't. If you could hold it, count it, and move it, you could track value. Historians still argue whether Rome's casual attitude toward standardization was lazy or brilliant. Maybe both. It allowed flexibility across thousands of miles and dozens of cultures, but it also meant every merchant, every tavern, every booth was its own tiny kingdom of math. No 2 counting boards alike. No 2 piles of calculi identical. You adapt or you fail. Back at the booth, the clerk is tallying bribes. Well, special administrative gifts. 2 stones placed just off the main board. A secret system, hidden in plain sight. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Rome's expensive. You get it. By late afternoon, your back aches. Your fingers are dry with wax. You've memorized the shapes of 6 different pebbles. You don't know what day it is anymore, but you understand. This isn't just accounting. It's survival. In a world where scrolls burn, tablets crack, and memory fails, a single stone can carry the weight of truth. And if it gets dropped, well, there's always another pebble. You find yourself squatting beside a worn wooden board laid directly on the ground, no legs, no cushion, just 4 splinters waiting for a clumsy knee. This, apparently, is a bank. Well, not a full bank, more like a moneylender's office run out of a shaded portico between a butcher and someone selling ambiguous ointments. Still, it functions like a financial heart valve, pumping coin and credit to Rome's buzzing limbs, and its main tool, a board, some pebbles, and a man named Decimus who smells faintly of smoked eel. He greets you with a nod, brushing aside last night's fig pulp from the counting grooves. Sit, he says. You do. The ground is warm. A cat watches you with deep skepticism. You glance at his setup. Instead of scrolls, he has 3 trays of calculi, sorted by color, black, gray, and milky white. You ask what they mean. Debts owed to me, he says, tapping the black ones. Debts I owe, he adds, pointing to the white. Then he picks up a gray one and rolls it between his fingers. These are complicated. The gray pebbles, the ones representing promises, favors, and arrangements better not spoken too loudly. You learn fast. Roman banking isn't just math. It's politics, gossip, and guessing who's going to fall out of favor next week. Decimus runs you through a typical transaction. A man borrows 100 sesterces. He doesn't get all the money up front. No, he gets credit tokens, wooden chits or marked wax, and his debt is recorded on the board, 10 pebbles in a row. If he repays on time, they move backward. If he's late, more pebbles are added. And if he defaults, Decimus doesn't say, he just glances at a nearby ledger with a large X scratched across it. Memory is fragile. he mutters. But stones never forget. You try sliding pebbles across his board. There's something elegant about it. Each move has weight, literally. The tactile feedback makes it harder to lie to yourself, to others. You feel the transaction. It's satisfying. Honest. In a way, paper never is. Historians still argue whether this kind of manual counting was more accurate or just more personal. Some say it prevented large-scale fraud. Others argue it encouraged petty creativity, like one lender who started using lentils instead of stones, allegedly to keep things lighter. But mostly because he could snack on the interest. Decimus shows you his emergency backup system. A wax tablet carved with groove lines, just in case the wood board breaks or gets his word interfered with. He carries it everywhere, even to the baths. You wonder if he ever left pebbles in the caldarium. The board structure is straightforward. 5 horizontal grooves, the bottom for units, then tens, hundreds, and so on. The top row, reserved for uncounted promises. Basically, I don't know what this is yet, but I'd better remember it. He says this with a grimace. You learn that Roman counting boards weren't always wood. Some were stone slabs, others bronze plates with embedded tracks. Wealthier merchants used ivory boards, though those often warped in the heat. Once, a trader tried using polished glass marbles, which promptly rolled into a sewer grate during a storm and took half his ledgers with them. One board was even discovered near Pompeii, scorched but intact. Its pebbles had fused to the surface from the heat. A moment of math, frozen forever. You ask Decimus if this system ever failed him. Once, he says, a slave kicked my board during a tense negotiation. 30 pebbles scattered. I lost track. Gave the man a 400 sesterces discount by accident. He shakes his head. Bought the slave new sandals so he wouldn't trip again. That's one way to handle errors. Another client arrives, drops off a clay tablet with a note scribbled on it. Repayment in 5 days, don't send thugs. Decimus chuckles. He thinks I send thugs. I send reminders. He taps a white pebble into the upper groove. You ask about large sums. Surely they don't use hundreds of pebbles. Oh no? He grins. We abstract it. 1 pebble can represent 1,000. Depends on the board. But that's risky. Why? He shows you a trick. One move of the hand slightly adjusting a pebble's position between 2 columns, and the amount changes by hundreds. There's power in ambiguity, in the unspoken agreement of what a stone means. It hits you. The board is only accurate if both parties agree on what it represents. This isn't just bookkeeping. It's a social contract. A dog wanders by, sniffs a calculus, and promptly pees on the corner of the board. Decimus sighs. That's why I keep backups. He reaches into a sack and pulls out another board. This one's smaller, more delicate, meant for travel. He calls it his pocket abacus. You hold it. It's beautiful. Walnut wood, fine grooves. Each pebble has a tiny inscription, numbers, letters, curses. You don't ask. By now, the cat has fallen asleep beside the main board. A few pebbles are caught in its fur. You consider the possibility that half of Rome's economy is riding on the nap schedule of local animals. It wouldn't be the weirdest thing today. Decimus prepares to close for lunch. He gathers his stones with a ritual precision, brushing each one off and murmuring as if speaking to old friends. He counts backward, cross-checks with his wax, sighs once. Deeply, you feel oddly calm. The board, the pebbles, the process, it's all so deliberate. There's no rush, no buzzing, no screen glare, just the slow, careful dance of thought made solid. You help him store the calculi in their pouches. They clink quietly, like a lullaby in code. Come back tomorrow, he says. We'll do compound interest. You nod and pocket a pebble. Just one, not for math, for memory. The crowd in the Forum Holatorium shifts like a restless tide. Traders, farmers, retired soldiers with questionable tunics, and you, standing now at the edge of something unexpected. An accounting performance. Yes, a literal math performance. In public, with pebbles, you squint. A tall, theatrical man in a wine-colored toga is center stage, platform surrounded by 3 assistants and a tray of polished calculi. He speaks loudly, clearly, as if he were performing Virgil. But no, he's shouting about lentil prices. 17 modati at 5 asses per solidemasa, plus the gate tax and hauling, minus the rot deduction. he declares, punctuating each number by moving a stone along the board with exaggerated flair. The crowd watches, rapt. A few people cheer. One woman gasps when he adds a fifth pebble to the top groove. Public accounting. You didn't see this coming. Turns out, not every Roman tax or market calculation happened in backrooms, especially not in the larger cities, where transparency meant something and suspicion meant everything. Merchants had to prove their honesty, especially during tax season or after a mysterious price spike on essentials like salt, wheat, or imported Gallic cheese. And how do you prove it? You get up on a wooden crate and count your pebbles where everyone can see. You edge closer. The abacus is mounted on a stand, with rows etched deep into the wood. The pebbles glint in the sunlight, some black, some bone white, one that might actually be carved ivory. The accountant/performer waves his stylus like a baton, and his assistants echo his numbers by repeating the calculation behind him using duplicate boards. It's synchronized, like a chorus of math monks. He finishes a calculation with a flourish. A cheer goes up. He bows. Then another man approaches, red-faced, scroll in hand. A challenge. Oh no, a rival accountant. He slams the scroll down and demands a recount, accusing the first man of shaving 3 modii off the top like a spoiled fishmonger. The crowd gasps. A few coins exchange hands as side bets form. You hold your breath, and then it happens. Both men reset their boards. They pour out their calculi. A third party, a gray-haired woman with 3 wax tablets and a terrifying frown, steps in as moderator. What follows is part duel, part math lesson, part street theater. You watch as the two accountants slide their pebbles in sequence, calling out values, citing temple tariffs and road fees, adjusting for spoilage. One assistant drops a calculus mid-sentence. Everyone groans. A child behind you asks, "Did that cost them the match?" You don't know, but you nod gravely. The debate escalates. Someone references an edict from the grain prefect, claiming it overrides an earlier regional policy. Another shouts, "That only applies to port cities." Someone throws a fig. Historians still argue whether these performances were formalized civic events or just marketplace improvisation. Evidence points both ways. Some surviving wax tablets list dates for accounting exhibitions, often following the arrival of supply caravans. Others suggest these shows were more spontaneous, sparked by disagreement, fueled by ego, and tolerated by bored magistrates who enjoyed the drama. In either case, it worked. Public calculation was a social equalizer. If a merchant could justify his numbers, he earned trust. If he couldn't, the crowd might turn on him faster than a Senate vote on bread subsidies. You glance around. There's a scribe jotting down results. A vendor selling calculator snacks, mostly olives. One man offers to sell you a lucky pebble for 2 denarii. You decline. Still, there's beauty in this chaos. Math, in Rome, isn't private. It's performative. That doesn't make it less accurate. In fact, it might make it more. The pebble isn't just a tool, it's a witness. And the abacus, it's not a desk, it's a stage. The first accountant finishes a revised total and holds it aloft, a neat arrangement of 8 pebbles and 1 faintly red bean. He shouts, "The deficit stands at most at a single amphora, and that was spoiled." The moderator nods. The crowd groans. The rival accountant bows in reluctant defeat. Coins shift again. No one's quite satisfied, but no one riots either. That's something. You're swept up in the aftermath, a blur of laughter, grumbling, and a few offhand marriage proposals shouted at the victorious accountant's assistant, who, to be fair, has great cheekbones and an extremely organized board. You turn to leave and almost trip over a small child trying to copy the pebble pattern in the dirt. Are you going to be an accountant when you grow up? You ask. She shrugs. I like the noise they make. You get it. That soft click of stone on wood. That rhythm. That ritual. That comfort. It's not just about numbers. It's about proving something in public. Honesty, accuracy, competence, or at least the ability to bluff until the crowd gets bored. You walk away as the performers pack up their boards and pouches. Their pebbles disappear into bags, into folds of togas, into sleeves and sandals, like traveling actors or prophets. And you start to wonder how much of the empire runs not on gold, or law, or power. but on the sound of one small pebble sliding into place, it starts with a sneeze, not yours. One of the clerks, the kind with dry parchment elbows and an eternal frown, lets out a sharp, nasal achoo in the middle of a crucial calculation, and just like that, the board tips. Pebbles scatter. The office freezes. It's not a dramatic freeze. No gasps or lightning bolts. Just the kind of thick, stunned silence that says, we are now living in a nightmare. You watch as 37 tiny calculi clatter across the polished table, roll onto the tiled floor, and ricochet off sandal straps, chair legs, and someone's foot. One lands in an amphora of vinegar. Another vanishes into the folds of a curtain. This is it. The ancient Roman equivalent of a spreadsheet crash. The scribe who sneezed is already apologizing. Loudly, sweat beads on his forehead. The man beside him mutters something about bad omens. A third, probably the supervisor, lets out a slow, deep sigh and begins the process of what modern tech support would call manual recovery, which means recounting everything. You see, there's no cloud storage in the Roman world, no USB stick, no autosave every 3 minutes. If the board crashes, the memory dies, unless you've got a backup, which you're about to learn is rare, precious, and often completely ignored because humans are, well, optimistic. The group begins searching for the runaway pebbles. One man drops to all fours and finds 2 under a bench. Another retrieves one from his wine cup, grimacing. Someone swears a black calculus is missing. That one represented a debt from a senator's nephew. The room tenses. Nobody wants to be the guy who misplaces political money. It's worse than misplacing actual money, because at least denarii don't have powerful uncles. The solution: they begin rebuilding the numbers from memory. And guess what? No one remembers the exact original layout. Was it 5 pebbles on the 3rd row or 6 on the 2nd? Was that lentil shipment from Alexandria recorded on Monday or Tuesday? Did the extra amphora of fish sauce actually arrive? Or was that just a hopeful rumor? You watch it unfold. Voices rise, fingers point. Wax tablets are waved around with increasing drama. Someone says, "I knew this would happen," which is only ever helpful in a smug, deeply unhelpful way. Historians still argue whether this reliance on physical pebbles was wise or wildly reckless. Many believe Roman clerks maintained a kind of spatial muscle memory. They didn't memorize the numbers themselves, but the pattern of the stones, a bit like remembering your PIN not by the numbers, but by how your fingers move across the keypad, which means if the board resets, the memory disappears too. It's both poetic and horrifying. Eventually, someone pulls out a wax copy, a rough transcription of yesterday's board layout, made by a particularly paranoid clerk who's now basking in the glow of well-earned smugness. It is not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Slowly, they begin restoring the layout. Stones return to grooves. Debts reappear. Fish sauce is accounted for. Crisis averted, sort of. But here's what sticks with you. One sneeze nearly erased a week's worth of accounting. One careless gust of wind. One bump of the elbow. One curious toddler. Any of these could reduce the financial memory of a Roman office to a pile of indistinguishable rocks on the floor. That's why some offices start adding safety ridges, raised wooden lips around the edge of the counting boards to stop pebbles from escaping. Others assign assistants whose job is to guard the layout during calculations. One particularly anxious clerk you meet later in the day even glues pebbles to the board temporarily, using a faint wax adhesive only during inventory. He whispers, just until it's confirmed. You can't blame him. You hear stories of worse disasters. An accountant who tripped, fell backward onto his board, and inverted an entire year's grain calculations. Another who used 2 different sets of calculi, one rounded, one flat, and mixed them up during a wine-soaked evening audit. The result: double payment to a senator's estate and a very awkward apology letter. Some offices begin implementing layered systems, one abacus for visual counting, one wax tablet for writing, and one verbal repetition, a chant-like recitation of the total that helps everyone remember. 3 amphorae, 2 denarii per, plus 6 for transport, carry the 1, subtract 1 for spoilage, total 14. They chant it together, like a hymn or a charm against forgetting. It's oddly beautiful. You realize that Roman accounting is not foolproof, but it is deeply human. It understands that memory is fragile, that tools fail, that even in an empire of marble and bronze, a single pebble lost in a crack can mean the difference between balance and chaos. By evening, the board is fully restored. The scribe who sneezed is forgiven. Mostly, he's now required to sit at the back of the room with a scarf over his nose. The supervisor installs a wax ridge around the board and orders a second copy to be recorded before end of day. Everyone nods. You glance down at the counting board. The pebbles sit there now silent, solemn, reassembled. They don't blink. They don't beep. They just remember until they don't. You're sitting now in a quieter room, less marble, more creaky wood where the soft shuffle of sandals and murmured calculations feels like a heartbeat. This isn't the forum. It's not even a proper office. This is where the real memory lives. Octavia, someone calls gently. You look up. A young woman with close-cropped hair, ink-stained fingers, and eyes like old rain enters the room with a cloth pouch in one hand and a wax tablet balanced expertly on the other. She's not a clerk. She's not even technically a scribe. She is what the Romans call a living ledger. Octavia doesn't just work with numbers. She is the backup system. When pebbles scatter and wax melt and scrolls get mysteriously eaten by goats, they call for Octavia. You sit beside her, and she doesn't speak for a moment. She's counting. Quietly, under her breath, eyes closed, not using fingers, not using stones, just memory. She opens her eyes. 43 modi of grain from Ostia, 9 crates of salted herring from Massilia, payment deferred on 6 due next market day. A pause. Client name. Lucius Tyrannus, slight limp, suspicious beard. You blink, she smiles. Memory is easiest when it's tied to something personal. Her pouch contains pebbles too, but they're different. Some are marked with tiny scratches, her own private system. They're not for counting. They're anchors. When she needs to retrieve a transaction from 2 weeks ago, she selects a pebble, closes her eyes, and visualizes the layout of the board from that day. She sees the space, the hands, the voices. It's not math. It's theater. You ask how she learned to do this. I was trained in a counting house that couldn't afford new wax, she says. They used me instead. She shrugs like it's normal. You try not to look too horrified. Historians still debate the role of human memory assistants in Roman business. Some believe they were rare, high-status specialists. Others suggest they were common, especially among women and enslaved people who were denied formal education but entrusted with repetitive, detail-heavy labor. Octavia falls somewhere in between. Paid, but barely. Respected, but not officially. Needed, but often ignored. She begins to demonstrate. You give me a list. I'll remember it. Then you check against the pebbles. You rattle off 6 fictional transactions: wine from Gaul, a tunic shipment, 3 goats, a debt repayment, a bribe listed as temple donation, and a marble bathtub nobody asked for. She nods slowly, and you begin arranging pebbles. She doesn't watch, doesn't need to. She waits. Once you finish, she opens her eyes and recites the exact amounts, in the exact order, including your fake bathtub note. Then she adds, you forgot the delivery fee on the tunics. She's right. You laugh nervously. She doesn't. It's easier when you don't get distracted, she says softly. That's why I hate windows. She gestures toward a sand-filled tray in the corner. Not a sandbox, not decoration. It's a calculi rehearsal space. You can sketch memory layouts in sand, she explains. Temporary, easy to reset, good for testing theories. You kneel beside it. The sand is fine, slightly damp. She hands you 5 pebbles and asks you to reconstruct the layout you just made. You try, slowly, carefully. It's wrong. She doesn't laugh, just rearranges them with swift, quiet hands. Then she smooths the sand flat again with the side of her palm, an elegant little swipe that erases history without drama. You see, she says, that's the danger of externalizing everything. If you don't rehearse it here, she taps her temple. You're at the mercy of every sneeze and spilled jug. It clicks. The Romans didn't just rely on objects. They relied on people living repositories of trade, of tax, of trust. Some were scribes. Some were slaves. Some, like Octavia, were trusted. because of how little they needed to write down. Still, she has backups. She shows you a wax tablet with grid markings, where she copies select tallies once a day just in case. Not everything, just the important debts, the ones involving senators or wine. She flips it open and shows you a symbol, a single horizontal line with a dot beneath. That's me. She says, means I verified this line. You ask how many errors she's caught? Hundreds, she says. Most were accidents. Some weren't. She once exposed a grain merchant who shifted 2 pebbles on the board after dark, claimed a miscalculation, blamed fatigue. Octavia remembered the original layout perfectly. The merchant paid a fine and lost his license. Pebbles are powerful, but people are terrifying. Before you leave, she hands you a pebble. It's tiny, smooth, painted with a red dot. That's your bath, she says with a wink, just in case you forget it again. You tuck it into your satchel, a memory, now anchored, not on parchment, not in code, but in stone and sand and someone else's head. You're back in a government building, marble floors, solemn statues, the faint but persistent scent of boiled cabbage, and someone is waiting for you in the corridor. He's tall, polished, far too awake for this hour. His toga has gold trim. His sandals are clean. This is Caius Pulcher, official calculator to the Emperor's court, and he is smirking. Come, he says, you're about to see something delightful. That's always an unsettling promise. He leads you into a sunlit room filled with tall windows, guards, and one truly massive counting board mounted on a pedestal like a sacred altar. Around it stand 3 assistants, 2 scribes, and one increasingly nervous-looking senator, and at the center, a velvet-lined tray of exquisitely carved calculi, obsidian, marble, glass. One looks suspiciously like it came from a necklace. You suspect the Emperor has nice things. Pulcher grins. His imperial excellence is due any minute. You sit. The marble is cold, which keeps you alert, which is unfortunate, because what follows is one of the most confusing math magic tricks you've ever seen. It begins with Pulcher clapping twice. His assistants spring into motion, sweeping stones across the board in synchronized moves up, down, diagonally, like dancers in a geometric ballet. Pebbles click into grooves with a rhythmic snap. Wax tablets are flipped. One scribe begins whispering numbers under his breath. Pulcher narrates the process in a voice smoother than olive oil. We begin with the pre-taxed import values of African grain. Add the palace transport fee. Subtract the senior storage exemption. Multiply by the Julian efficiency coefficient. Wait, what? You try to follow. You want to follow. But somewhere between port-to-palace surcharge algorithm and imperial overhead vector, your brain surrenders. This is less math, more performance art. The Emperor arrives casually, of course surrounded by fans, flatterers, and someone holding a very tiny dog. He gestures for the demonstration to continue. Pulcher straightens. He slides one gleaming white calculus across the top row. Everything stops. This, he declares, represents the savings achieved by streamlining delivery routes through the Appian realignments. The Emperor raises an eyebrow. Pulcher nods gravely. The room exhales. Historians still debate whether these public math displays were effective or just elaborate illusions. Some emperors demanded clarity. Augustus was famously numbers-obsessed, while others just wanted to be impressed. Calculi performances became tools of persuasion, not just accounting. If the pattern looked clean, if the pebbles clicked into place with satisfying symmetry, it didn't really matter if the actual math made sense. It just had to feel true. One fringe theory even suggests that some emperors had favorite pebble colors. Red was too aggressive. Blue was calming. Black was authoritative. No source confirms this, but Pulcher definitely pauses before sliding the black one. You lean toward a scribe. Do they ever make mistakes? She smiles without humor. Only once. Apparently, one accountant miscalculated a military ration budget during a live demonstration. The Emperor caught it. He wasn't thrilled. The story ends with a goat, 3 barrels of spoiled fish sauce, and a new post governing a marshy island somewhere off Sicily. So, no pressure. Back at the board, Pulcher reaches the finale. He arranges 10 stones into a perfect arc units, tens, hundreds, in descending order. Then he steps back. A hush. The Emperor nods once, just once. The scribes scribble. The assistants sigh with visible relief. Polker turns to you and whispers, "We've just saved 30. Our ancestors. Possibly." You blink. Possibly. He grins. Depends who checks. You ask if he actually believes his own calculations. "Oh, certainly," he says. "I believe in the performance of certainty." He gestures to the pebbles. These are trust tokens. We use them to project confidence. Precision is an added bonus. You think of Octavia, the human ledger, of Decimus, counting debts in a shadowed portico, of the tavern clerk muttering over wine-soaked wax. Here, everything is polished, exaggerated, elevated. But beneath the show, it's still just stones, arranged by people, trusted by emperors. You ask Pulcher what happens if someone challenges the math. "Oh," he says, leading you to a side room. "We have tools." The room is smaller. No marble, no velvet, just 3 sand trays and a man in a linen tunic copying a layout by hand. This is where the actual math happens. The show board is rehearsed, recreated here, again and again, until the pattern is smooth enough to perform. If anything feels wrong, if a pebble seems out of place, the performance is delayed, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. You realize the emperor didn't see the real calculation. He saw the summary. Pulcher picks up a single pebble from the tray and places it in your palms. It's smooth, warm, slightly worn. "This one's from Britannia," he says. "Traveled farther than most of my colleagues." You laugh, but it's true. The pebble, like all of them, is more than math. It's a traveler, a survivor, a prop, a memory. And for one brief, imperial moment, it held the Empire's attention. You're somewhere new now. Not in a forum, not in a shop, not in the marble belly of bureaucracy, but out in the open, under sun-blasted skies on the edge of a military encampment. The smell hits first. Sweat, leather, cooked barley. Then the dust, kicked up by hundreds of sandals. And then the numbers shouted by officers, scrawled in chalk on tents, counted out loud by men who look like they have never smiled once in their lives. Welcome to the most underappreciated branch of Roman logistics, military pebble math. A grizzled optio second in command of a century waves you over. His tunic is stained, his hands are scarred, and his abacus looks like it's survived 3 invasions. "Ever move an army?" he growls. You shake your head. He grins. Then, you don't know pain. He gestures to a battered board, carved directly into a slab of flat stone and set on a low crate. Atop it, pebbles. Familiar, but here, they're arranged in a grid that looks nothing like what you saw in the forums. This isn't bookkeeping. This is deployment. Each stone represents a unit, not just one soldier, but 10 or 20, depending on color, size, or scratch marks. Black for infantry, red for archers, white for auxiliaries. He moves a black pebble forward. That's first cohort. 60 men, 2 tents per 10. He slides another. Supply train, 6 wagons. Don't put it near the latrines. Ever. You nod solemnly. Logistics, the silent killer. Behind you, other officers are doing the same, arranging troops, ration allocations, camp layout, all on pebble boards. This is how they plan marches, organize sieges, track food. One board even maps latrine rotation. Because Rome's greatest victories weren't always on the battlefield, they were in avoiding dysentery. You watch as the Optio adds 3 white pebbles to a new row. That's the Medicus team. Gods help us if they get misplaced. He points to a red-marked stone set on the edge. That one's cavalry. Doesn't sit on the board. Why? Because cavalry never cooperates. They show up late and trample everything. He says it like an inside joke. You believe him. Historians still debate whether Roman armies standardized their counting systems. Some evidence from Vindolanda shows boards etched with unit labels, while others suggest local commanders created their own codes. Pebble dialects of war. And in the chaos of campaign life, anything standardized tends to get replaced with whatever still works when it's raining, and someone's goat has eaten your scroll. You ask if they ever lose pebbles? He snorts. Every damn day. But then he shows you something clever. Backups. Not wax tablets this time. Sand trays, carved into transportable wooden frames. They sketch layouts there, first temporary memory, then transfer the results to the stone board once confirmed. Even smarter, each team has a designated memory keeper. usually the youngest scribe, chosen for having the most unpunished brain. His job, watch the layout, remember the moves. If anything spills, he recreates it from memory. They call him the Ghost. You meet him later. He's 17, jittery, and holds his slate like a sacred relic. He once had to recreate a full rations plan after a donkey stepped on the board. The donkey survived, barely. This redundancy is everywhere. One officer even uses beans instead of pebbles, because they're lighter and you can eat them in emergencies. He pauses, then adds, "They also remind me not to lie." You don't ask. Later, as camp is struck and the troops begin packing, the boards come out again. This time, it's weight distribution. Each supply cart gets loaded according to the pebble math. 1 dark stone per 50 pounds. Each moved piece of gear is tracked and balanced, so carts don't tip and mules don't revolt mid-march. It's precise, beautiful, in its own dry, dusty way. You find yourself helping. You move 1 black pebble from the lower groove to the 3rd column. The Optio watches. Now, you've just reassigned 60 men to latrine duty. You freeze. He grins. Just kidding. That was a decoy. You sigh. He nods toward the last stone on the board, etched with a symbol that looks like a spear and a grain stalk intertwined. That one's food security. If we forget it, everything else falls apart. You glance at the growing lines of soldiers in formation, everything neat, everyone in their place, and somewhere in the center of it all, behind the armor and the banners and the booming commands, is a board. Some pebbles, and a man who knows how not to lose them. You think of all the places you've seen these stones: tax booths, taverns, imperial halls, memory trays in back rooms. And now, here, on the edge of war, quiet, unassuming, deeply ordinary, but absolutely necessary. You pick up 1. You hold the Roman army in your hand. You're back in the city now, but something feels off. It's early evening, and you're hunched inside the rear corner of a grain ledger house, one of those dusty little operations crammed between a bathhouse and a sandal repair shop. The clerk across from you is trying to explain a transaction, but he's sweating through his tunic and keeps glancing at the door. On the table between you, a half-cleared counting board, 5 wax tablets, a sack of suspiciously mismatched pebbles, and a bowl of lentils. Wait, no, in the bowl of lentils, the clerk uses them like stones, smooth, rounded, easily movable. He pushes 3 across the edge of a wooden tray and grins like he just solved a crime. These represent the extra charges, he whispers, the kind that don't get written down. Ah, creative accounting. You've stumbled into the part of Roman bookkeeping that no one brags about, where the numbers start to stretch, where estimated spoilage becomes whatever we skimmed off the top, where gift to the temple is actually a bribe to a port inspector who's too busy scratching his backside to notice the manifest doesn't match the cargo. You didn't mean to end up here, but here you are. The lentil math continues. 1 for the customer, 2 for the warehouse, 1 for special handling. You glance at the actual wax tablet. It lists none of this. The lentils are the real record. The wax is for show. The clerk sees your raised brow. He shrugs. It's Rome. Historians still argue whether such shadow systems were rare exceptions or widespread norms. Some say they were the natural byproduct of a vast, uneven empire too large to monitor every coin, too clever to trust everyone. Others claim this level of improvised fuzzy math was baked into the system from the beginning. Either way, everyone seemed to know it was happening, just not out loud. You watch as the clerk scoops up his lentils into a pouch labeled Miski. You ask, what happens if you mix them up with your actual food? He deadpans. You pray to Mercury and chew slowly. Behind him, another scribe leans in and asks for help calculating a perishable tax adjustment. You realize that's code for, I lost half the shipment and need it to look like I didn't. They solve it with bean substitution. 5 lentils become 3 chickpeas. Different meaning, same layout. It's clever, it's horrifying, and it's kind of beautiful. You ask if anyone ever got caught. Oh, sure, the clerk says. They bring in an auditor. Your ears perk up. An auditor. In ancient Rome, he nods grimly. Big guy. Scrolls like arms. Memory like an elephant. Voice like vinegar. Turns out, auditors travel between grain houses and shipping offices, conducting snap checks of pebble math, wax tallies, and even lentil records if they could catch you in time. Some carried their own abacus and would demand you recreate your transactions in front of them live, like a cursed improv show. And if things didn't add up, the consequences varied. A warning, a fine, a revoked license. In extreme cases, a public shaming. One infamous case involved a baker who was caught using olive pits as hidden profit markers. His punishment, forced to count out a full day's earnings using nothing but pits in front of the forum, took him 7 hours, lost 3 customers and his dignity. Back in the ledger house, the clerk explains how some shops split systems entirely. One clean set of pebbles for official math, and one dirty set for the real business. The trick, he says, is keeping the 2 bags from mixing. One time they did, and ended up overpaying a cart driver by 4 whole denarii. He bought a goat and named it Profit. You chuckle. He does not. Still, this mess isn't lawless. It has rules. Weirdly enough, no substitutions without witness. No lentils on temple donations. No bribes recorded in red ink. Red means honesty. That last one is probably made up, but it sounds right. You lean back and think, this isn't an accounting failure. It's an adaptation. In a city where prices change hourly, ships arrive late, and inspectors prefer sausages to scrolls, people learn to work the system like musicians tuning faulty instruments. You don't play the notes, you play the cracks. And the pebbles, they play along. Later, the clerk gives you a parting gift, one shriveled lentil with a tiny red smear on it. Don't eat it. He says it owes someone money. You slip it into your pouch anyway. One more entry in your growing collection of memory markers. This one. It smells like lies, but it counts. You're summoned too early for something called a fiscal reconciliation review, which turns out to be Roman for let's see who's been making stuff up. You arrive at a dim, column-lined hall in the lower quarter of the Curia Julia. It's the kind of room where even the statues look nervous. A long wooden table dominates the space, flanked by ledgers, abacuses, and 3 very serious men in identical togas who all share the same expression, bored but vengeful. This is the audit committee. And today, you get to witness the most Roman of traditions, accountability. Enforced by fear and passive-aggressive questions, a clerk from the spice market stands before them. His hands shake slightly as he opens a wax tablet and presents his pebbles laid out on a board that's been smoothed and re-smoothed so many times it looks like glass. I accounted for the cumin imports from Tyre. He begins, 4 crates, 1 crate missing. Sea damage. One of the auditors nods. Explain the discrepancy. The clerk slides a pebble black, rounded, probably representing the missing crate into the upper left groove. The auditors exchange a look. One raises a stylus and gently taps his wax tablet like it's a warning bell. Did you report this sea damage in the previous tabulation? He asks. Silence. The clerk swallows. Historians still argue. The man continues. Whether saltwater erases debts or just corrodes honesty. Oh boy, it's a poetry auditor. The clerk attempts a smile. The report was delayed due to, sand. Another stylus tap, louder this time. A pebble falls off the table. This is getting bad. You lean toward the assistant beside you and whisper, what happens if they don't like his math? She whispers back. They ask for a recreation from memory. No notes. You gulp. And then, like that, they do. Please reconstruct the entire cumin transaction layout. One auditor says flatly, using only pebbles. You watch as the poor man bends over his board, sweat collecting at the corners of his eyes. He begins to arrange his stones, one by one, carefully, nervously. But something's wrong. There's hesitation. The pattern wavers. He places a white pebble where a gray one should go. The middle groove isn't lined up. The shipment total feels too high. The auditors don't react. They don't need to. Their silence is a diagnosis. Eventually, one clears his throat. We thank you for your presentation, he says with the calm tone of someone preparing to unleash doom. He writes one line in red wax and dismisses the clerk. No explanation, no shouting. But the assistant beside you whispers, he'll lose his license. Probably go back to selling anchovies. Ouch! You don't move. Next up is a woman from the textile district. She's got a worn board, organized meticulously, with labels scratched into the wood. Her pebbles are color-coded. Her wax tablets cross-reference each row. She even brings her own sand tray, just in case someone questions her layout. The auditors ask the same question. She doesn't blink. She recreates the pattern perfectly. No pebble out of place, no grooves overfilled. Her fingers move with the steady precision of someone who's done this 1,000 times and likes it. The stylist taps are slower, less ominous. Your records are adequate, one says. You swear you see the corners of her mouth lift. A Roman auditor's version of a standing ovation. She's dismissed with a nod and you scroll. You ask your assistant how common this is. Quarterly. She replies, unless someone complains. And what counts as a complaint? Too much math. Too little math. Pebbles that smell like vinegar. Take your pick. You try to imagine modern tax offices using this method. No spreadsheets, no calculators, just pebbles, memory, performance, and shame. It's almost theatrical. You learn later that some audits were even conducted publicly, in small amphitheaters or market squares, especially if the accused was well known. The goal, not just correcting the math, but preserving trust in the system. If someone failed publicly, it reminded everyone else not to try anything clever with lentils again. One notorious case involved a wine merchant who used cherry pits to track sales. A rival exposed him by showing that cherry pits from two separate vineyards were identical. The merchant claimed nature's fault. The auditors were not amused. You ask your assistant if any punishments were physical. Rarely, she says, but reputational damage. That sticks. Some merchants went years without recovering. You watch a final scribe step up. He's old, slow. He has to steady his hand to even place a pebble on the board. But when he starts calculating, his movements are smooth. He doesn't hesitate. Every stone finds its place like it never left. One auditor leans forward. How long have you been doing this? The scribe replies, since before your stylus had teeth. Everyone freezes. Then someone laughs, and for once, the room softens. You realize this system works because it's deeply personal. It's not just about numbers, it's about honor, memory, ritual, and the quiet thrill of watching someone slide the last pebble into place and know it was right. You're not sure how you got roped into this meeting. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was bad timing. Maybe it was the smell of free roasted chestnuts near the Temple of Saturn. But now you're standing in the courtyard of a tax assessor's office, watching what appears to be the early stages of a full-on accountant's rebellion. A group of tired-looking clerks, scribes, and junior bookkeepers most clutching pebbles, boards, or tea-stained wax tablets are gathered in tense clusters. Their tunics are wrinkled, their sandals mismatched. Their expressions, furious. What's going on? You whisper to a nearby assistant who's nervously folding and refolding the same corner of her wax cloth. She gives you a look that says, where have you been? They want us to switch, she says. Switch to what? She spits the word like a curse. Columns. Apparently, the Imperial Treasury has decided that pebble-based memory is inefficient for scaling and wants every regional office to adopt a new system, columned ledgers, stored centrally, written in long-form Latin. In other words, goodbye pebbles, hello paperwork. You feel the collective temperature drop. One older scribe with chalk dust on his elbows stands on a crate and begins shouting, we've kept this empire together with 15 stones and a plank of wood. We don't need parchment to tell us what a shipment looks like. We saw it. We touched it. The crowd cheers. Another raises a clay pot full of pebbles like it's a holy relic. This, he shouts, is memory. This is accuracy. This is what kept the Pontine Canal flowing on time. Someone begins rhythmically tapping their abacus like a war drum. You look around and realize this isn't a tantrum, it is a movement. Historians still debate whether this was a formal protest or just collective resistance. What we know, somewhere around the late 2nd century, a series of tax reforms tried to phase out localized, stone-based accounting in favor of parchment scrolls, numeric columns, and central audit archives. In theory, logical. In practice, Disastrous. Why? Because the new system required total memory abandonment. No more checking your Pebble board. No more muscle memory. Everything now must be referenced from a scroll stored in another scroll room, guarded by a man named Tullius who loses his keys twice a week. One of the clerks waves a written edict like it's a scroll of doom. From now on, he shouts, we are to record debt using column lines, numeric headers, and pre-approved ink. Gasps. One person faints. Another clerk mutters, but I don't have pre-approved ink. A woman with ink-stained fingers shouts back, that's the whole point. They want us to fail, so they can replace us with, she lowers her voice, Senate appointees. The phrase hits like thunder. The revolt begins in earnest. You watch as boards are raised above heads, pebbles poured into jars, and held aloft like ancient relics. Someone's carved a slogan into the dirt. Trust in the stone. You ask if anyone plans to actually resist the change. The assistant beside you grins. Oh, we already have. She leads you inside a nearby storeroom. On the surface, it's filled with scrolls and wax tablets. But hidden beneath the top layer, tucked neatly in drawers and sacks, are pebbles. Thousands. Every office keeps backups. She whispers. They don't trust the new method. Not really. You notice some boards have been modified now dual purpose. Top half, pebble grooves. Bottom half, space for columns. They call them hybrid abati. They say it's for transition, but we know better. You ask how long they think they can keep this up. As long as memory's faster than parchment. Outside, these speeches continue. One man references a well-known grain audit that took 13 hours using scroll math, the Pebble version. 12 minutes. Plus, time for figs. The crowd cheers. You realize something subtle is happening here. This isn't just about math. It's about power. Who gets to define accuracy? Who owns the truth when memory lives in stone, but policy lives in ink? You look again at the edict scroll. So official, so ornate, so completely disconnected from the people actually doing the work. You think of Octavia, reconstructing debts from touch alone. You think of the Optio, deploying soldiers like checkers on a dusty board. You think of a lentil dropped quietly into a bowl silent, but significant. And you know, this rebellion might not succeed forever, but for now, these people are holding the line. One pebble at a time. Someone hands you a cloth pouch. Inside, a single smooth calculus. For solidarity, they say, you nod, and you keep it. You're walking now through the old quarter, where the streets get narrower, the stones underfoot more uneven, and the scent of time seems baked into every wall. You follow a crooked alley past shuttered shops, overturned crates, and a cat who clearly owns at least 3 properties. At the end of the alley, a door. Above it, carved into the lintel in tiny letters, Memoria non mentitur. Memory does not lie. You knock, no answer, but the door creaks open anyway. Inside is a room filled with silence. Thick silence. Not empty, but deliberate. You're in the office of a man named Lycinus, known by few, respected by many, feared by every pebble counter who's ever had to fudge a grain total to cover for a late delivery. He's sitting on the floor, cross-legged, surrounded by stones, thousands of them. Some tiny, some massive, some polished, others chipped, scorched, ink-stained. They're not arranged in a board. They're arranged like a timeline. You blink. Each grouping of pebbles represents a year. Lycinus doesn't look up. He's muttering to himself, sliding stones into new arrangements. His fingers are calloused in that way you've only seen in people who use their hands to think. You clear your throat. Are you counting? He finally looks up. His eyes are bloodshot but calm. No, he says, I'm remembering. You sit. This is the last generation of true pebble counters, the ones who lived and breathed the system before the parchment reform swept in like a bureaucratic dust storm. Lycinus, it turns out, was once chief accountant for the Central and Nona the Imperial Grain Distribution Network. I could tell you, he says softly, how many sacks of wheat moved through Portus in the year of the triple eclipse. I could tell you which ones were short by 3 modi and why the delivery scribe cried afterward. You don't ask how, you know how. He reaches behind him and pulls out a single black calculus, shaped like a bean, worn nearly flat. This, he says, was the one they blamed. He turns it over. I didn't misplace it. The board did. Warped in the heat. The groove narrowed. It fell out. He places it gently on the floor again, beside three others, forming a memory map. Not for calculation, for witness. Historians still debate whether men like Latinus were anomalies memory hoarders, human archives, or if they were more common than records suggest. People whose lives became so interwoven with the Pebble systems that retirement wasn't just a shift in works. Yes, it was a slow forgetting. Licinus tells you stories. Now that he's decided you're worth the time, a shipment rerouted because of a mistranslated wax note, a senator's mistress who tried to erase a debt with a hot knife and failed because a clerk remembered the sound of her pebbles, a boy who could count faster than most men could speak, but was sold before he turned 15. He doesn't romanticize it. He doesn't have to. You ask if he ever used the new system columns? Scrolls. Ink. He looks away. Tried. For a while, I'd forget which ink color meant what. Kept smudging numbers. Felt like lying to paper. He pauses. But the stones never asked me to explain. You notice one section of his floor is empty. What's that for? You ask. He smiles faintly. Pebbles, I've forgotten. They used to sit there. A gap. A shadow. A negative space of memory. You realize then, the calculi weren't just data points. They were companions. They helped build the empire. Yes, but they also built the men who carried them. And when the system changed, many of those men simply drifted. You look around at the collections, the configurations, the near-religious quiet. You don't feel sad? You feel reverent. Licinus leans forward. There's one left. He reaches into a box and pulls out a smooth red stone larger than most, almost oval. It shines with an inner warmth. This, he says, was the last pebble I ever used officially. The day they made us sign everything in triplicate, the day I stopped knowing who I was in the numbers. He presses it into your pulse. I don't need it anymore. You feel its weight, not heavy, but insistent. Outside, the city sounds return. Bells, haggling, footsteps, bureaucracy grinding on. You look at the stone. It remembers more than you ever could. And now, it's yours. You find yourself back where it all began, standing inside the tabularium, Rome's memory vault. As the afternoon sun floods in through high windows and dust drifts like golden snow. But something's changed. The counting boards are gone. Not all of them, but many. The desks once cluttered with pebbles now hold long scrolls, neat inkpots, tidy wooden rulers to guide columns. You hear the scratching of styluses instead of the clink of stones. The few calculi that remain sit quietly in bowls, half forgotten, like relics of a faith no longer practiced. The room isn't louder, just emptier. You wander. A young clerk waves at you from behind a wall of parchments. He's cheerful, bright-eyed. He tells you about the new system, more efficient. He says, easier to store, better for tracking shipments across provinces. He smiles like someone who's never dropped a pebble between floorboards and spent half the day praying it wasn't the tax token for the senator from Capua. You nod. But something about it feels thinner, more abstract. He shows you a scroll with crisp columns, units, values, dates. It's beautiful in its way. Clean, impersonal. Then he pauses. Sometimes, though, he says, lowering his voice, I use these. From a drawer, he pulls out a battered cloth pouch. Inside, 5 old pebbles, different colors. One chipped, one flat on one side like it's been pressed beneath centuries of worry. Just to get my head straight, he admits. Sometimes the scroll doesn't help me feel the number. You get it, and you realize the calculi aren't truly gone. They're quiet. They're hiding in drawers, tucked behind ledgers, nestled in coat pockets, and in memory trays beneath desks that belong to people too polite to admit. The old ways still make sense. You visit one last ledger house. An older clerk is sweeping the floor, his counting board now a shelf for scrolls. You ask if he misses it. He pauses, then kneels and lifts a plank from under the shelf. Beneath it, his original pebble board. Intact, still marked with ink-stained grooves. I don't use it, he says, but I like to know it's there. You smile. Historians still debate when exactly the Pebble system ended. There was no law outlawing it, no edict of erasure. It simply faded, worn down by scrolls, buried beneath ink, absorbed by bureaucracy. But it never truly died, because someone always kept one calculus in a pouch, or a grain merchant still laid out lentils in a secret groove. Or a retired soldier still tracked his pension by the rhythm of 5 black stones on the hearth? The empire changed. The system evolved, but the memory of the pebble, its texture, its sound, its weight endured. And so, before you leave, you reach into your satchel and take out your stone, the one given to you in silence. The one from Lycinus, worn smooth by decades of counting, decision-making. Remembering, you place it gently in the groove of a board tucked behind a scroll rack, not to record a number, not to mark a debt, just to say, I remember, and then the story fades. And now, as the last light softens the marble corners of the room, and the quiet sound of scrolls being rolled away echoes into stillness, you exhale. Let the rhythm of this ancient world settle like dust around you. Let your thoughts slow, one by one, like pebbles being returned to their pouch after a long day's work. The weight of memory, after all, is light when held with care. You picture a counting board, not on a desk, but floating gently in your mind, its grooves filled not with numbers, but with moments, with stories, with soft-footed scribes and stubborn merchants, and the quiet strength of someone who remembers the truth when no one else does. Maybe you never moved grain across provinces. Maybe you never tallied the rations for 1,000 legionaries. But in this calm, in this stillness, you have traveled just as far. You have felt the weight of a tiny stone and understood what it meant to trust it. And now you let it go. Let the numbers fade into a blur. Let the wax melt smooth. Let your body sink deeper into rest, as if the floor beneath you were warm marble and you were curled beside an old abacus, listening to the night sounds of an empire falling asleep. The records are closed. The pebbles are still, and there is nothing left to count. Only dreams.